Does everybody know the goal? The goal is to get to the finish.
No.
I guess Hex.
Oh yeah, dude, this is seriously a heart attack. Oh, he's so fast. He's so fast.
I got catapulted forward by one of those spinny things.
I pitched the idea of doing a mini game jam to my friend Ken with the intent of picking an idea that seemed doable within a week. The game would be limited in scope and as an effort to actually complete something within a short time period. So we had considered some game themes generated by AI art, but decided to scrap them in favor of a simple art style. We agreed on a basic game loop, which involved players running to get to the finish line and avoiding obstacles that got in the way. And most importantly, that the game would use netcode to sync the players so we could play online. We didn't mock up a whole lot of paper designs or anything, but described it as a top-down race where the camera might be angled. We thought about if the player should be able to jump, but agreed that the top-down perspective might make it difficult to be precise. Jumping would make it into the game anyway, but in the form of jump pads, instead of an input the player could press. I had gotten a head start on setting up the project, Git repo, and starting some analysis on which netcode libraries to try out. After one YouTube search, I imported Unity's netcode for game objects and followed through some tutorials. Once the networking framework was chosen, a rudimentary game started being blocked out, starting with a player object, which all it did was move around. But during this time, I was already experimenting with the game feel, since movement would be a big part of this prototype. Depending on the direction pressed, the player's rigid body velocity was instantly set to that direction. This would create some issues later with regard to players interacting with other physics forces that had to be coded around. For example, when we were brainstorming obstacles that the players would have to avoid, I wasn't anticipating us having bumpers that would bounce players around, so we would eventually need a way to override the player's physics. Once players were moving around and netcode appeared to be working, I knew that we needed a way to corral the players in and have them wait for a cue to start. It was a race after all, so spawning players in and letting them run around wasn't okay. I drew a lot of inspiration for the lobby from games like OpenRA and Battle.net and so on. This was also my biggest failure and success. For one, I think most of us take for granted the complexity and stability of most game lobbies. We tend to focus on the coding design challenge being on the game loop itself. It became apparent almost immediately that I would need to refactor our existing code to support this idea. Ken did try to talk me out of it, but I'm pretty stubborn. I most likely spent a couple days just on setting up the game lobby. It turned out pretty good. Players choose their color, their name, host can select the level, and so on. From that perspective, it was a pretty big success, especially since we can copy and paste a lot of the lobby code to other games when we move forward. It was a massive failure in the sense that it took away time from designing the real game loop. In hindsight, the lobby was completely unnecessary. Players could have been allowed to join a level hub and run around before the race started, and then the host could teleport them to the starting line when they're ready to begin. But it was a great learning lesson working with the relationship between UI components and network objects. The annoying part of netcode is all the different points of failure that can occur. Like, what if the client disconnects? What if the host disconnects? What if there's lag? Can players rejoin a session in progress? There's seemingly no end to all the edge cases that can occur, which would paralyze me if I was stuck on being a perfectionist. Where I think we did well was addressing the most important ones, like client or host disconnecting, and ignoring the rest. Obviously, we can't do this for a full game, but for the purpose of our mini game jam, it seemed fine. Netcode is also hard to juggle while coding. Example, who is who? Are you the host or the client? You need to be careful of running code for only the host and not the clients, and give additional consideration about how you want win or lose events to propagate up to the server and back down to the connected players. In this case, the host is the server and the client. By the end of the game jam, I felt that we reached a breaking point of complexity, and we'd have to start refactoring and use more patterns. If there were more mechanics, behavior, or game modes, we'd very immediately hit a wall in terms of progress, and see an influx of hard-to-track bugs. So in this case, I'm glad we picked a very basic idea for a game. Early on, we agreed on some very basic obstacles: the wall bumper, floor bumper, a sweeper, and a jump pad. I knew that if we wanted to start building levels, we needed the physics figured out for those obstacles. When the player runs into the bumpers, they're repelled in the opposite direction. Sweepers don't repel players, but act as moving barriers that can ruin a player's day if they're too hasty. Jump pads let players get to higher areas, which was pretty fun. I think players really enjoyed the jump pads, and it led to some interesting level design ideas when it came to verticality. We experimented with a dash, which originally I had misinterpreted as a run. A akin to A Link to the Past. I shared the clip of the new mechanic to Ken, who was upfront that that's not what he imagined the dash to be. Initially, I was deflated, but after some contemplation, I realized he was right. I repurposed it quickly to a short dash, more similar to Hyperlight Drifter. It felt pretty great and was a cool example of how collaborating with others can lead to a better result in the end. Plus, we can keep those unused mechanics in our back pocket. Level designer is a heavy hat to wear. Most games need fun levels, but coming up with something can take forever. Our goal is to create 2 levels each. After Ken wrapped up his 3D models and animations, he got started on level design ahead of me, and immediately started feeling the pain of trying to iterate on the levels. It took way too long to make a change. Switch to the game scene, host a game, hit play, wait for the countdown, just to see something that wasn't placed right or wasn't fun. I definitely felt his pain and considered some options. I settled on creating a test manager object. So placing it in a level, hitting play, it will delete everything in the level immediately except the test manager, additively load the game scene, host a local host game, play it. This also lets us do things like skip the countdown sequence by checking if we're in a test mode or not. This was such a huge gain for our level design feedback loop. Big win, we'll be using this going forward. There were definitely no shortage of bugs even though we went with a small game prototype. Rotating sweepers were not synced with the server, which meant that your opponent could move right through them. At least it looked like that on your screen. A weird bug was happening when many players spawned in at once. It appears that when the network spawns them, they're all spawned in the exact same spot, and physics tries to resolve, pushing them out from one another until they have enough space to rest. The more players, the more force. Even as many as 3 or 4 players can cause them to explode and be sent flying. Initially, I tried fixing this bug, but after a few failed attempts, I wondered if we could work with it. Classic case of it's not a bug, it's a feature. I created a translucent hollow sphere in Blender, which could act as a cage, so players would still explode, but it acts as a random way to place players at the starting line. Is it fair and balanced? Nope. But it's cool. The cage is then removed when the countdown ends. This problem appears to be happening because we are trusting client-side movement, and the server is trying to take control of the players. And this creates some kind of tug of war between the client and the server that ends up manifesting in the form of really weird physics. Another issue happened when we placed 2 bounce pads too close to one another. If the player were to step in between them, they actually double the amount of force when they jump. This is intentionally left in some level. At some point, we realized we wanted people to actually try out the game. I sent out some private invites to friends with information that we had about an upcoming playtest happening. The Discord post didn't get much traction on its own. It occurred to me that Discord isn't everyone's preferred way of communication, so the majority of the coordination actually happened in DMs. We had 8 players total, and it was a blast. We encountered some additional bugs that weren't discovered with less players, like not being able to ready up, or the spectator camera forcing players to watch others during the start of the next game. Overall, though, it was a huge success, and the playtesters seemed to genuinely enjoy the game. So a big thanks to everyone that actually helped us out on that playtest. We really appreciate it. The choice to work on a super basic game was a huge W for us. In most cases, we were good about avoiding scope creep when it came to gameplay and mechanics. I'm also happy that we chose an online prototype because it makes a huge difference, at least to me, to be able to share the experience and play together at the same time. Deciding on very basic gameplay meant that it was easy to build out levels and rationalize and think about decisions and how they might impact our game jam. Our schedules didn't really line up perfectly, so Ken and I toiled on the game asynchronously and then met up at pivotal milestones to playtest and think critically about how things are going, but also kept a real-time chat up to bounce ideas, discuss stuff informally. In fact, most of our chats were informal. After a few weeks had passed, my wife Jen commented, "I don't think you can call this a game jam anymore." We did a great job of not overthinking decisions and taking the right action when we felt like something wasn't working. We were both open to feedback and continually made improvements as we were building the game. Sounds and basic music was thrown in, but I forgot to actually turn it on before the big playtest, so nobody got to hear it. And Jen was actually the announcer in the game. We were able to record those lines in a matter of minutes, and we picked out some that we liked and threw them in.
Ready, go!